No matter where we're born, no matter the circumstances, each and every one of us deserve the opportunity for a meaningful life. Our lives are made richer by our ability to impact one another.
Opportunities for every person should be based on their ability, not based on race, gender, religion, where they went to school, or who their parents are. It is impossible to succeed ourselves without helping others.
From the halls of Congress to global conferences, innovative thinking, translated into action, helps level the playing field for all of us.
Historically, clinical trials have not included diverse patients, and on average, it takes 12 years and $1.4 billion to take a new therapy from the laboratory to patients' hands.
Milken Institute brings together leaders from various sectors to generate new ideas that leads to fair and equitable future.
Because if there's one thing we want to pass on to our children, it's that their futures are possible, as long as there is commitment to make it so.
We recognize that global problems often have local solutions, and local problems left unaddressed often have global consequences. So we weave together a cogent response from the philanthropic, science, business, and government sectors.
After all, leaving the world better than we found it is a priceless gift. Except it doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. That's where the Milken Institute comes in, connecting resources.
Welcome to the 6th Annual Milken Institute Middle East and Africa Summit. We are delighted to see you and look forward to your participation over the next 2 days. To open up the summit, please welcome to the stage Executive Vice President of Milken Institute International, Laura Deal Lacey.
Good morning. On behalf of my colleagues and on behalf of the chairman of the Milken Institute, Michael Milken, I would like to welcome you to the 6th Middle East and Africa Summit. As we begin, let me share a little bit about the Milken Institute, who we are and why we're here. The Milken Institute is a global think tank. We have 4 pillars: finance, health, philanthropy, and international. Our international work connects global markets. Our mission is simple yet profound: to create shared solutions for the world's most pressing challenges. We gather today at a time when it feels like change is the only constant, given the rapid pace of tech innovations, the complexities of geopolitics, the interdependence of supply chains. All these evolving challenges remind us that no single country, company, or individual can address these global challenges alone. And that's why we're here. The Milken Institute focuses on bringing together creating neutral platforms, nonpartisan, and creating peer-to-peer exchanges between global investors. We're committed to increasing access to capital, making healthcare innovations more accessible, working with philanthropists to optimize their giving, and helping investors think through long-term solutions that will improve lives. This summit is more than a meeting of great minds. It's more than a place to have interesting conversations. This summit is a call to action. Together, we have the opportunity to collaborate, innovate, and reimagine what's possible for the future. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoy the program.
Please welcome the panel on Global Overview, Navigating a Changing Global Economy, moderated by Chairman of the Milken Institute, Michael Milken.
Well, it's 2024, and we're here in December in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, for the conference, and hopefully we will all find a way during the next few days to increase the chances for cooperation, economic development, healthcare, environment, and many other issues. This session in the morning is really a global overview, and we have representatives who cover the world, and part of our effort today is to get a perspective from how they see the world, from both their positions of responsibility, from where they live and where they travel. And so give us a chance to see the world through their eyes. There are a number of slide decks available to you. There's a QR code covering 3 of those slide decks that you can pull up on your phone. One is on capital markets and financial issues, and one is on demographics and the role that it will play in the future and the enormous change in demographics. And the last one, the number one driver of the world economy for the last 200 years, is on health and medical research. So we are all aware of the dramatic changes, and that is why the Milken Institute has spent so much time, particularly in the Middle East, over the past few decades. And we originated this conference a number of years ago that Laura had mentioned to you. The latest report from UBS, which is also available to you online, of their wealth report that had been done by Credit Suisse, shows today that the wealth of the Middle East and Africa has now reached 67% of the wealth of the Americas. And so a dramatic change that's occurred in the last 2 decades, and the importance of the Middle East as a provider of capital to the world can be seen in these results. The changes in the world's wealth can be seen in some of the programs that have been very successful. Any country that has more than 20 million people today, Australia today has the highest median net worth of any country in the world because of their adoption of the superannuation plan. Today, over $3 trillion US for the citizens of Australia. As we look in health and medical research, the dramatic change that's occurred here in the Middle East, particularly in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, where modern technology is available in hospitals and medical clinics throughout the region today. And individuals do not have to travel now to other parts of the world to achieve this. In the UAE, opening many years ago, the Imperial College Diabetes Center, I had the good fortune of being at, was at that time the most modern diabetes center in the world. And Mubadala's investments and the UAE, which led to the creation of the Cleveland Clinic here in Abu Dhabi, providing high quality care. And yesterday and the day before, I had a chance to visit the new hospitals in Riyadh, which once again have modern technology, maybe the most advanced system on analyzing and taking blood and feedback. So in many ways, the world has become flat. And so we today on this panel look to kind of see how these things play in to the global overview. One, the role of technology, with computers 1 million times faster and data storage cost 1/billionth. And what is going to happen with AI? 2, the dramatic change in demographics, where 40% of all the children in the world will be living in Africa in the future, and what's going on in capital markets and health and medical research. And to start us out, I can think of no one better than Makhtar from the IFC, our partner at the Milken Institute for so many years here. And as we looked at what were the challenges many years ago, our conclusion was we needed to create experts in financial technology, access to capital, economic development, regulatory systems, stock markets, pension fund systems in the developing world. And so we had a chance to team up together many years ago, and we bring individuals from these countries who've agreed to work in their government's finance area to Washington and London for 8 to 9 months to go to school and also for internships to create counterparties for you to deal with in these countries. So let's start with somewhat the mission of the IFC, International Finance Corp, if you're not totally familiar with that acronym. And from your perspective, looking at 100 or 200 countries in the world and providing access to capital, what are your top priorities today in the Middle East and Africa?
Thank you so much, Mike, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me just talk about first the partnership that we developed over years. I think it's a good example of what IFC is doing and want to do. We know that without investment in the private sector, without channeling all the resources needed in emerging countries, we will not be able to give jobs to these 1.2 billion young people who come on the market in the next 10 years. This is the main challenge, quality jobs, because this is a basis for stability in the world. This is a basis for addressing all these challenges that we are facing today: migration, conflict, poverty, and so on. So the focus that Milken also has on health is very much aligned to what IFC also is doing. So IFC is present in 186 countries, and we are part of the World Bank Group. We are able to leverage two other parts of the World Bank Group, which is IBRD, which help government to define policies which are suitable to growth and to crowding in private sector. And we have another part of the group which is providing guarantees, political guarantees, commercial guarantees, which are so needed by investors to come to countries. So we are more and more moving now to increasing our ability to mobilize resources. Last year we did 56 billion, and this year we should be around 65 billion of our own capital and the capital that we mobilize. So when I talk to investors like you, Mohamed, and others who are wanting to go to some countries, the first thing they will tell me is that what is the return I will get and what is the risk that I'm facing. My job is to help you solve that problem. So how do we do it? By leveraging our knowledge that we have in this country, understanding the political economy, the ecosystem. Secondly, we're trying to bring more and more blended finance from philanthropy. And Mike, you were telling us earlier that with the baby boomer, you will have more and more people who will be giving money to philanthropy. In the past, philanthropy were doing things on their way, and the capital market and government were doing things separately. More and more, we realize that we need to leverage each other. So what we are doing is to mobilize resources from philanthropies to de-risk investments that private sector is making. And that allows us to leverage much more 147. Secondly, there is a lack of equity in a lot of emerging low-income countries. And we have patient capital, and we are ready to put much more equity in those countries. Third, we know that often the cost of developing projects, the development costs are very high in low-income countries. So what we are doing is we do the development effort, we prepare projects, and we bring them not to the capital market to be financed, not only by us, but by other partners, and we trying to bring all these instruments that we have to de-risk those investments. Lastly, among the things that we are doing is we are trying to integrate some of this country in the global supply chain. As you know, we have seen a diversification of the supply chain for geopolitics reasons, but also for other reasons. And there is need to integrate more of the SMEs and companies in those countries in the global supply chain. And we are very well placed to doing that through our trade financing, but also by other instruments. Lastly, one of the reasons I'm also here is to push for the green economy. Actually, we are part of the Altera dialogues, and actually when we have meetings this weekend discussing it, we have been among those who have been setting the standards in green bonds, which have been growing, in blue bonds, and we are now working on investment related to those. And just to give you a sense, 40% of the investment in renewable energy going to emerging market is South-South cooperation now. So the world is changing dramatically, and IFC is, I think, well placed to support that effort.
Well, thank you. So just a couple important notes for those watching online or here. The IFC can invest in for-profit entities. It is the for-profit investor of the World Bank. You can own up to, 20% of a company?
Yes, we got up to 20%. We have, like any investor looking for an IRR, which is high. And what we are doing, for instance, is that when we're mobilizing, not only we seek IRR, which is consistent with what the market wants, actually the return of our equity investment has been outperforming the S&P 500.
All right.
And we have credit losses, which are much lower than a lot of investors in the emerging market. Actually, we are around, our historical data give us losses of around 3%, which is consistent to S&P B or B3 from other credit agencies. So we are a good investor to invest with.
So once again, for anyone viewing this panel, I want to stress IFC, World Bank are rated AAA. Yeah. And so when you wonder how you're going to deal in a particular emerging country, how you're going to handle the currency, they have one of the world's greatest currency trading desks at the IFC and the World Bank to help you figure out how to hedge and take advantage of their AAA rating in terms of cost of capital. So we're looking for an exciting year for your investments next year. So, Mohamed, today, obviously, you've spent a good part of your life in Egypt, but today you're spending a lot of time in London, and you're also spending a great deal of time now looking to invest in the United States, and those of us in the United States welcome you with open arms. Talk to us a little bit about how your family sees the world today in terms of your values as investors, as entrepreneurs, and as philanthropists. And one of the reasons many years ago at the Milken Institute, we created this center in Washington for strategic philanthropy, as Makhtar pointed out. We estimate $40 to $50 trillion could move into philanthropic structures over the next 20 years. And so trillions of dollars coming a year from philanthropies. The world's largest philanthropy today is Novo Nordisk, a pharmaceutical company that the founder gave 28% of the stock or so to a foundation worth well over $120 billion. Warren Buffett has recently announced his $120 billion, all of which will go into a foundation. And so the size of foundations, today 5 of the 10 largest foundations in the world are medical foundation, Eli Lilly being another one. So how does the world look for you and your family in these areas?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mike, for inviting us to this great gathering. It's great to be here. You've built a great institute and the Milken Institute around the world. So I'm very honored and pleased to be here among my esteemed colleagues here. Well, I grew up in a family where my father and mother were, I think, philanthropists before the word became a famous word, philanthropy, and that's how we grew up. And I'm originally Egyptian. We started the family in the cotton business, and then Nasser came to power. Our wealth was confiscated, then we started again when Saud came to power and started as a GM dealer in Egypt. And through that, our business grew. And then in 1996, we had the Caterpillar franchise in Egypt, and I told Don Feitz, then the chairman, I said, Don, we like to think globally and we'd like to cross borders. So we got offered the opportunity to invest in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's where really I felt that there's a huge potential, and we bought the Unilever business in sub-Saharan Africa for the Caterpillar business in East and West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Sierra Leone, and now we have a lot more countries. And then we saw the opportunity there. So philanthropy to us is something, honestly, we're passionate about, and it's something that we feel as entrepreneurs, as business people, we have to do our role for the communities that we serve in. And that brings me to maybe a subject I'm passionate about, which is sports. Through philanthropy, we can do a lot of things in healthcare, in education, so we've invested in that. The Mansour Group today We're in about 100 countries. We operate, the family office, Man Capital, operates out of London, but we're in 100 countries. And a lot of the emphasis that we have, for example, in philanthropy, in 1999, a gentleman in an area of sports called Tom Vernon, he was a scout for Manchester United. He went to Ghana and started this academy called Right to Dream. And that academy housed 15 kids in Ghana from Accra to play football. And his fiancée then became his wife. She was a teacher. So they taught them sports and education. Today, I'm so proud to say that we have 140 footballers playing professional football around the world from this academy. And then we have 120 kids that received scholarships from Stanford, and kind American families, British families, many families around Europe and around the world housed these kids and gave them a scholarship to high school. So we have a scholarship fund of about $30 million to house these kids and give them proper education in different parts of the world. And today, their life has transformed. And as a result, we believe that we as private sector people that have been fortunate enough, we have to do our duty in philanthropy and provide help in education and healthcare. That's why we also invested in Inspired, which started in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Africa with 4 schools. Today we have 80 schools around the world. Inspired is probably one of the second bundles of schooling in education around the world. And that has given us also to higher the level of education. Again, I say, we bought Right to Dream back in 2021. Right to Dream Academy had 7 players that played in the World Cup. Then, when I went there, I said, why don't you come and look at Egypt? It could have a potential for an academy. They said, Sir Mansour, Egypt is not on our radar screen. I said, just go take a look. Mo Salah is one of the best players in the world today, so maybe there's another opportunity. They went, they scanned, compassed Egypt and came back after a week, said we saw 100 Mo Salahs. So we created that academy in Egypt. And I'm proud to say, in the second year of that academy, the women's team in Egypt, first time for Egypt to qualify in the Champions League, the women's team won the bronze medal, and we're very fortunate and honored. So this to us is a result of philanthropy coming to life, creating opportunities for young men and women. I had dinner with one of the graduates from the academy, the Right to Dream Academy, and he was sitting beside me and said, Mr. Mansour, I'm from Ghana, and when I was 10 years old, I had nothing. My job was to go out in the street and try to earn my living. Today, I'm a graduate of Stanford. I've been drafted by the MLS, that's the Premier League in the United States in soccer, and I have a future in life. So things like this really get to our heart. That's what philanthropy is all about.
Thank you, Mohamed. So many years ago, one of my many advisors told me that people read the sports section first. And Mohamed gave you a little reason here, because generally the front page of the newspaper is only telling you about the terrible things that happen in the world. But on the sports section, someone won. Someone had to win the day before. Someone reached new goals, new heights. And its role that it's played increasingly in the world due to technology has created sports fans. I'm not sure about each of you, but when you get to be a grandparent and you wonder, when do your grandkids get up in the morning? So I had a grandson. It was hard to get him up before 11:30 in the morning. But then he became a fan of the Champions League in the UK, lives in Los Angeles, and it's not unusual to see him up at 4 in the morning now on his phone watching the Champions. So he's now been introduced to the morning because of sports. But it has brought us all together. And the other thing I want to underline that Mohamed pointed out is the enormous rise of women's sports in the world. And it might have started in the United States many years ago when the women's soccer team won the title. This year, The women representing the United States won more medals in the Olympics than the men did. And this year, for the first time at the Women's Championship in college, more people watch the women's play than the men. So this dramatic change in participation, the dramatic change that's occurred here in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, UAE, of women participation in the workforce, has also been coupled in sports that brings us together, brings common interest, and the role that it will play in the world where you have fans or people interested in your team no matter what country they're in. Even Pakistan and India stop arguing and fighting when they're playing each other in cricket. And luckily the game could last a week, so you have a long pause from those hostilities. Alan, you've traveled the world for so many years. You and I have been on many journeys together over the last 40 to 45 years. And so during this period, you've often pointed out, in order to navigate a route in the future, it's necessary to know where the journey starts. Where are you starting? In your view, where are we now? And maybe you can introduce all of us to your 4 Ds that you've told me about so often.
Yes, thanks, Mike. And the 4 Ds, I'll get to them in a second because it's a way to bring attention to the variables that Mike and I and the people at Milken and at Guggenheim have been focused on to position ourselves for what we see coming, or we saw coming and now is upon us, which is a dramatic shift in the way the global economy is going to be in the next 20 years versus the past 20 years. And the variables that we saw changing, and it also is why together we were saying that we see the Middle East as kind of the epicenter of how that change is going to occur. So real quickly, what does that mean, the 4 Ds? The first one is demographics. We've been through a period what was a very strong growth in the global economy, primarily driven in the global north, where you had a number of countries, and especially with China coming into the WTO, where you had a global economy where each and every one of the, or almost each and every one of those major countries and major economies had a very high working age population as a percentage of their total population. And anytime you have a large percentage of your economy that's working age, that is a very big positive for economic growth or GDP per capita, et cetera. And so we would say, as a slight example, if 2% nominal growth is normal, that may be true when there's 2% more people every year, but 2% might not be normal if there's 2% less people every year. And in all of these major economies, you are now facing the end of that period where we are now moving to where there is a aging and declining population in every single one of the major economies over the last 20 or 30 years in global GDP. Second is debt. So periods when you have working age population as a high percentage should also be a very good time for government finance. When a large percentage of your population are the ones that are working and paying taxes, and a small percentage are not working and receiving benefits and things from the government, that should be a very good time for government balance sheets to be strong. However, during that period, we are now seeing that almost every one of those major economies has run up record levels of government debt during this really good period for government finance. And now as that's shifting, they're going to have to make rather significant adjustments. The leader in that field is the United States, which now has debt to GDP of more than 100% of GDP, and where our interest expense currently is greater than our defense spending. And so there's a major shift that's going to have to happen one way or the other in all of those countries. The third D that we talk about is de-globalization, because the other thing that we saw in this open global economy was a period where we said, let's just open the supply chain, let's get our natural resources, our raw materials, our parts of the manufacturing chain from any place in the world that can deliver them in the cheapest manner, and let's assume that the world will always be open for that supply chain to operate. And when war broke out in the Ukraine, it shined a spotlight on, all of a sudden you get one kink in that supply chain and you can have a major disruption to the global economy and create a tremendous amount of inflation, which is what we just lived with. And so deglobalization is basically saying everybody now is sitting there and saying we have to refocus our supply chain. We have to find new places to get raw materials and manufacturing things, et cetera, because we can't let the global economy or our economy in each of our countries be dependent on 80 or 90% of any raw material or part of the supply chain that is located in one country or one little area that could get disrupted. And you see how that's playing out now in talks about both tariffs and restrictions of sending things like natural minerals. And the fourth D that we talk about is dysfunction. And that dysfunction is basically political. Because the other thing that happened in this global economy is in almost all of the developed world, opening up the global supply chain basically was very good for return on capital in the developed world markets, and it was a lot of pressure on the return to labor in those capital markets. And so when the average person in these countries is seeing their wages go like this, when they're seeing profits go like that, it creates a backlash. And if you look across all the Western democracies right now, every single one of them is tied up with an uprise of people saying the system isn't fair, the system isn't working. And so there's a lot to that, and we can get into how we're going to deal with it. But basically the main part of it that brings us here is over the last 5+ years, as we've talked with Milken, the Middle East becomes the basic best example of the pivot, where in a brief summary, we see the Middle East going from having been a great provider of capital and resources to the global economy and earning a return and helping build and drive growth. And that is now going to switch, where the Middle East can become the hub where capital comes back to and through the global South, which is where we have a young population, we have natural resources, minerals, et cetera, and there's going to have to be a wave of development in that part of the world, and the Middle East is positioned to be the leader in technology and finance coming to that region.
Thank you, Alan. So one of the things we try to do at the 250 Milken Institute conferences around the world is to really get you to think about where the world is going. Most of you, if you took time, would think about the world was going, but what is China going to be like at the number of 9 million children born last year? If life expectancy was 80, that's 720 million people. 700 million people in China are going to disappear in the balance of this century. No country except India has ever had a population that large as the population that's going to be contracting in China. And that's why the United Nations looks at things like Nigeria and is projecting now that Nigeria will have more people than China by the end of this century. Now, they might not be in Nigeria, they might be in the United States, they might be here in the UAE, and that in the United States today, 55 million people were not born in the United States more than any other country. Of that group, more than 10% were born in Africa, and 9% were born in Europe. So the United States has gone from a country where 75% of everyone not born there was born in Europe to less than 9% at this time. And these dramatic changes that Alan alluded to in demographics, coupled with the other factors of technology and access to capital, will cause you to kind of rethink how you're investing and what are the challenges. I now turn to one of my youngest friends, His Royal Highness Prince Turki, that we have been on many forums together over many periods of time. And I want to thank you for joining us here as you were for the very first session we had here in the UAE. So maybe we could start. I noticed you wrote a letter to the President-elect of the United States. Why did you write that letter, and what were your hopes in writing that letter?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, when Mike Milken beckons, you have to obey. So I'm very pleased and privileged to be with you and to be speaking to this wonderful audience in front of us. Before I refer to the letter, I will refer to your opening statement when you mentioned what you saw in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the development in technology and so on. Well, as a Saudi, I believe we're still a work in progress. And we still have to develop, I think, the necessary component that will make us succeed in our future and the aspirations of our people, which is to develop human capacity. And if I can rephrase one of your former president's statements, when he said it's the economy stupid, I would say it's education stupid. More and more education is what we need in our part of the world in order for us to go forward and accomplish the aspirations and ambitions of our people. The other thing I would refer also to Alan Schwartz's 4 Ds, and I will add another D to them, which is destruction. There is just too much destruction happening in our world today. And I think that the world community has to come together to prevent that destruction, whether it is in Ukraine or in Gaza or in other places of the world. We need to stop the fighting. And this is something I think that all of us should be working on. And the other thing, of course, is that the rule-based order in the world is in destruction these days, whether it is through the double standards or through other, I would say, mistakes and misconduct on the part of some people in various countries using destruction as a means of accomplishing whatever objectives they may have. Why did I write the letter to President Trump? Because President Trump has a track record for our part of the world. When he was president a few years back, he did some things that I would disagree with, but he did other things, of course, that make me look forward to having him do more. And if I can refer back to the 1973 war, when Egypt and Syria wanted to reclaim the then occupied territories in the Golan and the Sinai after the '67 war, the trauma that Israel faced in those days was one of total destruction of the country in the initial stages of the war. And if it wasn't for the United States' help to Israel at that time, as attested to by Israeli memoirs and Mr. Kissinger's memoirs, that trauma would have come to a bad end for the state of Israel. And today, in our part of the world, there is also mention of a trauma, the trauma of October 7th of last year, when Hamas took on what was considered to be the inviolable and the awesome might of the Israeli armed forces and managed to overcome the barriers that separated them from their eventual destruction of and killing of innocent people in Israel, and the horrendous record of that event. Responded to by Israel, of course, in the way that it has done in the past year and a half or more, nearly 2 years now. Total destruction, carpet bombing, sniping, etc., etc. Not just in Gaza, but also in Lebanon and in the West Bank and so on. So since President Trump had accomplished peace, if you like, between several Arab countries and Israel when he was president the last time, I thought I would remind him of that and ask him to live up to what he said during his election campaign this time, which was that he wants to bring peace to the Middle East. And from that perspective, since he implemented what he promised the last time, I hope that he will go forward and keep his promise this time and help us in this part of the world to end the destruction and the warfare that has taken so many lives and produced so many orphans and killed so many innocent people, that the ending should be something that we should all work for.
Thank you. And as he always does, my good friend Prince Turki has reminded us of humanity and its importance, but he's also reminded us from the fact that human and social capital, and you could look at it on that slide deck, if I just took one country, the United States, is estimated in financial terms to be worth 1,500 to 2,000 trillion. 10 times the financial assets, 50 times the size of the economy. And as Prince Turki reminded us, for Saudi Arabia or any country to achieve its goals, it needs to achieve the education of its people in the world we live in today, and also their health care, that they live longer, healthier lives. I'd like to now switch, if I could, to go back to you, Mohamed. Looking ahead, what are the key priorities for global leaders that you and your family feel that we need to address to foster peace, economic stability, sustainable development in the world, but for this group, particularly in the Middle East and Africa? What should our leaders be focused on?
Well, I think education builds nations. I think the leaders in the Middle East and in Africa should really try to foster education of young men and women. And that's how we'll be able to compete in a changing world. We are facing the biggest change since the 19th century. We had the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Now we're having the AI revolution. Now, what are the assets that people in our part of the world have? Is youth. I'd say 50% of our youth is below the age of 25. If we can foster that education element, give everybody a chance. It doesn't matter if you're operating out of New York, Chicago, London, Paris, or Accra, or Cairo, or anywhere in the world. Today, technology manages us to get everywhere. And look at how things have changed. When I moved from Egypt to the UK and then got into technology, I went to Silicon Valley. And I was really so astonished and so impressed with what I saw. So I said, we have to have a presence here. And because I saw how technology is changing the face of life, of how we see things, how things are done today. Everybody has, the iPhone. In 5-10 years' time, AI is going to change how we live. We have to be in the Middle East, in Africa, part of this. And we have to play a role. And education will support us there, I think, with the young men and women who really learn and try to be able to compete. To be able to compete, you don't have to have an industrial factory where you're producing iron. It's not brick and mortar anymore. It's the mind. That's how young people will help develop the world, and how young people will have us prosper it.
Mohamed, just to underline your point, median age in sub-Saharan Africa is 19 years of age. Median age in the United States and China is approaching 40 years in age. Substantially differences. Alan, what are your thoughts? What is the call to action for our leaders here and your priorities? You've outlined your 4 Ds. What should they do about it?
To see how this shift's going, I think Mohamed just put it perfectly, and we've talked about this in the past. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, the biggest winner was the United States, right? What did the United States have? They had a young population, especially coming after World War II, and the model they used was government would deal with externalities like dealing with climate or smog, et cetera, and education would come through the government and through taxes, that business would be able to use capital to participate, to drive bringing labor into the workforce, which we hadn't had in the United States before, and that philanthropy, the United States created the philanthropic model to fill in the gaps of who was left behind. I think that's exactly the pivot that can happen right here in the Middle East, right? The government is driving in places like UAE, Saudi, Egypt, and others, is driving, putting in the right infrastructure and the right rules and dealing with externalities. Capital can now flow into those countries that have labor, young populations that can be invested behind. And something you mentioned earlier, Mike, global philanthropy can help fill in the differences, can help deal with the inequalities that get created and try and bring more people like your philanthropy, Mohamed. And I'll say one that, Mike, you and I know well. I happen to chair. I spent a lot of time dealing with philanthropy in the United States and in my own backyard. And then I got brought into what is now the Clinton Health Access Initiative run by President Clinton, and I chair, which basically said we can take, as philanthropists, all that we know about healthcare, et cetera, but what Mike's talking about, you need the people on the ground to deliver it. So Chai now operates in, I think, I'm going to say 30 countries in, the poorer regions, bringing healthcare to those populations, and that's the part that philanthropy can play. But I think the model that the Middle East can drive is the one that worked for the United States in the last revolution.
Thank you, Alan. Makhtar, what strategies could be employed to strengthen these partnerships that we have here between government, business, NGOs to tackle these challenges? Obviously, the IFC sits kind of at the focal point for much of the world here in bringing capital, financial capital, and people together. What should we be focused on to strengthen these partnerships? How can we leverage the strength of the International Finance Corp?
I think, Mike, what you do is a big part of what we need to do is to put people from different grouping, from different horizons together to talk internationally. But that dialogue also needs to happen in countries. Because the first thing that an investor like Alan or Mohamed will be doing is to say, what does the investor in a country are saying before I put my money in that country? So we need to ensure that the dialogue is happening at that level and the lessons are brought. So recently with Ajay, the new president of the World Bank, it was put in place a private sector investment lab. And the private investment lab was trying to crowd out to get some information about what are the obstacles to have more investment in emerging economy, low-income countries. And what came out is the following. Uncertainty in the regulatory framework is something that needs to be tackled because without having the stability, without predictability, investors will not come. First element. Second, local currency. We have seen that often in investment, investors who are coming from OECD countries are facing local currency issues, a mismatch between the resources are invested in dollar-denominated assets and the incomes they're receiving in local currency. That's why IFC now is doing 40% of its work in local currency. The third one was guarantee on political risk and commercial risk. When you go in a country where unfortunately you have some instability in the country or in neighboring countries, investors will not come if they don't have that level of certainty. Fourth, how to help to get scale. When you talk to institutional investors or people who are investing at large scales, below $1 billion, they often think that it's not enough for them to move and do the groundwork needed to bring investment. So how to develop asset class that are interesting for large investors to be able to move this large amount of money in emerging countries. So we are now looking at a model which is looking at securitizing some of the assets, aiming also at what we call originate to distribute, not only to think about what we can finance, but to think about the problem to solve and to do the groundwork, the preparation of project, and bring them to capital market to be financed. It's a totally different way of looking at our role than in the past. And fifth, to share information about the real risks that people are facing when they invest in those countries. Often people think that the risk, they overestimate the risk that exists really in some of the emerging countries. And you know that because you've been working in a lot of this country. When you go and look at the reality, it's totally different. I will give you an example. 20-something years ago, I was Minister of Economy and Finance in my country.
Well, let them know your country. Not everyone has read the bios of every one of our panelists, your achievements. They're going to do that right when this panel ends.
So my country is Senegal. I'm from Senegal in West Africa. So it was interesting because at that time, no African country besides South Africa had a sovereign rating. So we wanted to go and raise money on the capital market. But if you go to Wall Street or to the city of London and you say a country in Africa want to raise money, they don't have time to look at your macro. They just say, yeah, the problem if a program with IMF or the World Bank, therefore is it this box. So what we wanted to do is to signal to the market that our economy was a healthy economy. So we did sovereign rating, and since then a lot of African countries, sometimes not very well, went that trajectory and increased their debt, sometimes not in a sustainable way. We are in the same process for the private sector and capital market. We need to be able to give a measurement of risk. That's why we have created this GEMS, which is a database which gives the default rating, credit rating in the country in which we are invested. And now it's a public information that is helping a lot of investors in pricing correctly the risks attached to those countries. So this is, Mike, the new kind of things that we'll be doing, and we'll be taking more equity. Because what is often missing in those countries, once they move in certain direction, they access debt, but equity is very scarce. And we need to bring some patient capital, which are good return, and be able to attract more of it.
So as we pointed out over the last decade particularly, it might not make any difference what you did unless we create opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa and Africa for this growing population. And so a lot of people, the farther away you are from your home, you perceive more risk. And I think this is the point you were making by looking at the data. Well, it's time for you to close our session, my good friend Turki. So let's talk about the King Faisal Center and its role. What do you think its role in fostering intellectual and cultural exchange will have, and how could we interact more with its efforts to accelerate the work you're doing?
The King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies was established by the heirs of the late King Faisal when he died back in the 70s. It started work in 1983, and its vision basically was the vision of the late king when he was asked, in the last interview he gave a day before he died, when he was asked by an American reporter, how do you see Saudi Arabia in 50 years' time? His response, and I will make it short, was, I see Saudi Arabia in 50 years' time as a wellspring of radiance for humanity. That's a tall order. And to have that as an ambition was something that the heirs of the late king wanted to emphasize when they established the King Faisal Center. So we have not only a working library, but an archive of Arabic manuscripts and conferences and lectures and researchers who come and do their research. And one of our pride programs that we have is that we call it Gateway KSA. And it is online, and it allows students from around the world to go online and subscribe to a visit to Saudi Arabia for about 10 days, in which they travel in the kingdom and meet other people, whether officials or non-official, and generally get to know the kingdom. Because the experience I have, and I think all of you must have had, is that when people come to visit a country, they go back with a different perspective of that country than when they had before they visited. So this program now has been going on since COVID ended, and hopefully, if any students around here, I hope you will go online. Remember, it's Gateway KSA, and you can subscribe to Visit to Saudi Arabia, and that's the best way, I think, to connect with people.
Well, I want to thank our panelists today. I also want to mention, as my good friend Prince Turki pointed out, seeing the world with your own eyes gives you a much better perspective than waiting for someone to report it for you. So thank you for joining us here in Abu Dhabi for our conference, and have a great day.
Please remain seated as we set the stage for the next session.